Welcome back, survivors. I'm glad you could join us tonight. If you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like to help boost the signal. And as always, drop a comment with your city or country. I love seeing where you're all listening from. We rolled into the cul-de-sac at noon, engines hiccuping, nerves shredded, tires crunching over shattered glass and the pale gravel that used to be somebody's landscaping. 12 houses ringed the circle, 2 stories, vinyl siding, porches with wind chimes that no longer moved. Mailboxes leaned like drunks. A sprinkler head ticked without water. The street had the soft, abandoned smell of cut grass that never fell, of barbecues that went cold mid-summer. We chose it because it felt like a bowl. One way in, no easy blind corners. A single mouth we could choke with steel and lumber. Also because the dead in this part of town were sparse, scattered shapes in the distance, more memory than menace. The air held that after, rain brightness that makes everything look cleaner than it is. It almost fooled me. We parked in a rough half-moon, hoods facing outward, eyes on the open mouth of the street. Nobody said the word safe. We just unloaded in a hurry that looked like purpose. Crowbars, car jacks, tie-down straps, a tub of mismatched nuts and bolts that would become language we all spoke. Delgado took charge without asking. Old Marines have a way of doing that. He pointed at minivans and pickups like he was setting artillery. You and you, nose to nose, push them till they kiss, kill the gaps with doors and pallets. Priya, our nurse, counted heads and water jugs, moved with a calm that made Milo stop crying even though she never touched him. The twins, Eli and Harper, dragged trash cans to form a first line while their father cursed softly and kept glancing at the house with the blue door like it still belonged to him. Jay, a lanky kid with a skateboard helmet still strapped to his backpack, scrambled up a maple and began calling ranges like we were archers. I walked house to house with a crowbar and a screwdriver, busting side doors that were already half broken, opening garages that smelled like fertilizer and oil, grabbing anything that could stop a body or break a skull. Ladders, garden stakes, a wheelbarrow with a wobbly tire, a stack of leftover fence panels that could be lashed together into teeth. We had 3 grills between us, the shiny stainless kind Suburban dads polish like altars. By dusk those grills were black and holy for new reasons, coals burning, grates stacked, a blue, white heat that let Delgado bend rebar over a sledgehammer head, while Jay worked bellows made from a box fan wired to a car battery. We called it a forge because the word felt like something that belonged in a world that still had names for work. The wall started with cars. Minivans nose to nose, parking brakes yanked, wheels cranked inward, chassis chained through wheel wells. Then came washers and dryers dragged from garages, appliance skeletons turned on their sides to fill the bite marks between bumpers. We laid 2x4s across hoods and ratchet, strapped them to roof racks, built a shelf, then stacked plywood, patio doors, mattress springs, anything that would tangle hands and slow teeth. On top of that we tied fencing cut from yards, chicken wire, chain link, even a section of decorative iron with leaves forged into it that looked ridiculous and perfect when it caught the dying light. From the rooftops the cul-de-sac looked like a crater on the moon, circular, quiet, the asphalt in the center pale where tires had never scuffed it. I took first watch with a pair of binoculars that smelled like the glove box where I found them. 3 shapes wandered the far end of the street, slow and crooked. A dog nosed a trash bag, then disappeared into the hedge. The sky went from copper to bruised purple. A plane passed, small and high, going nowhere. Inside the circle life tried to reassemble itself. Someone lit tiki torches that still had citronella in them, not for bugs, for courage. Priya boiled water on a grill and measured rice with a careful hand. 1 scoop each, 2 for the kids. Delgado drew a chalk line on the pavement and named it the muster point. If something breaks, if somebody yells, you run to the chalk. The twins pushed scooters in tight circles and pretended it was training. Their father opened his old front door and stood there a long time, breathing the air of a house he had mowed for, paid for, fought for, then shut it with a face that said he would never open it again unless he had to. When the first car battery died, the street went dim in a way I felt in my teeth. We switched to headlamps, to lanterns, to the red tail glow of a pickup left idling so Delgado could finish cutting plate from a water heater. He bolted that metal over the gap where two bumpers didn't quite meet, rubbed his hands, and told me to stop staring at the trees like they were going to walk. I told him trees do walk, slowly. They walk into you if you stare long enough. Around midnight the moans began. Not close, just the long, tired notes of things that used to be neighbors, carried on the kind of wind that finds gaps in your clothes. The sound made the twins go quiet. It made Jay climb higher in the maple. It made Priya press a palm to her throat like she could push her fear back down and turn it into something useful. Delgado said, "Hold. Hold." And the wall held because it was mostly our wool stitched together with straps. We made rules because rules feel like walls too. Dawn and dusk watches, one adult per roof. No one opens a garage door without a second set of hands. Food in one place, visible, counted, rationed, Priya in charge of the ledger. Water jugs stacked in the shade behind the grills, lids tight, no dipping, pour only. If you hear knocking at the far end, and you are alone, you do not answer. The last rule made someone suck air like a wound. We looked at the kids and said it again anyway. In the morning we renamed things. The cul-de-sac island became the yard. The space between the cars where we could crawl out if we had to became the throat. The maple became Tower 1. The roof of the house with the chipped brick chimney became Tower 2. The little pink tricycle with streamers became something that made Delgado swear when he stepped on it. Then a trophy when Harper kicked it under the deck with a grin. Renaming made it ours, or that is what we told ourselves. We hid what we had to hide. Priya tucked a few protein bars in the false bottom of her medical bag and told herself it was for emergencies. Not for her, for the kids, always the kids. The twins' father stashed a flask under the porch step that creaked. Promised himself he would only touch it when his hands shook too hard to lift a hammer. I slid 2 batteries into a flower pot and covered them with dirt. Told myself leadership needs insurance. When people are scared, they count other people's cans with their eyes. Better to keep a little uncounted. The first walker to test the wall came just after noon. A woman in a red blouse, one heel broken, hair caught in the wind the way it probably had on every morning commute she ever made. She put her palms on the chain link we had laced across a minivan grill and leaned until her wrists bent wrong. The chain rasped. Eli flinched. Harper did not. She lifted a slingshot, the kind meant for soda cans, and sent a pebble into the thing's temple with a pop. The woman sagged, slid, left skin on steel. Priya pulled the twins back with a look that said not yet. Not them, not today. By evening we had a gate hammered from a patio table, a hinge made of 2 ratchet straps, and a brace that looked like a crutch for a giant. Delgado chalked an arrow on the pavement showing how the brace slid, how it locked, how even a tired hand could close it fast. We rehearsed the motion because rehearsal is a religion, and we needed one. After dark the cul-de-sac breathed like a single animal, in through the grills, out through the lantern chimneys. I lay on the roof of Tower 2 with my boots against the ridge and watched stars find their places. Jay traded me the binoculars for a packet of mustard he had saved from a glove box, value measured in taste now, not in brand names. The mustard stung my tongue and made the cheap rice taste like memory. Across the circle I saw faces lit by cold glow, tired, stubborn, already a little changed. The wall looked sturdy in the orange light, cars and wire and plywood stacked like a dare. It would hold until it did not. Every wall is like that. A promise with an expiration date nobody writes down. We told ourselves we were a neighborhood again, just smaller, just tougher. We told ourselves the wall was a shield, not a cage. But I felt the circle in my bones, the way the chalk line could be a muster point or a boundary between us and us. We built our wall to keep the dead out. That was the line we would all repeat, the one that sounded strong in the mouth. Under it, softer, another truth began to breathe. We were already learning how to keep each other in. The first real morning inside the wall felt almost like order. Smoke curled from the grills. Delgado already had them stoked, using every scrap of charcoal we found in garages. The twins kicked a half-flat ball across the circle, while Priya poured boiled water into old Gatorade bottles. For a moment the cul-de-sac sounded like a neighborhood again, wood hammering, kids laughing, the squeak of hinges being fixed instead of broken. We carved shifts into the chalk like commandments. 2 adults per watch, dawn to noon to dusk, dusk to midnight, midnight to dawn. Delgado posted it on the side of a mailbox that still carried a stenciled family, name nobody wanted to say out loud. Jay painted numbers on rooftops with leftover fence stain. Tower 1, Tower 2, Tower 3, like labeling could turn asphalt shingles into a fortress. Food came next. Priya took the ledger with hands steadier than mine. Every can we stacked in her pile, every jar we set on the curb, she marked in careful strokes. Pinto beans 9. Tuna 12. Rice 16 pounds. Peanut butter, 1 jar already half empty. Every scoop of sugar looked like gold. She wrote it down and then wrote it again, double-checking like numbers might erase hunger. We tried to make it fair. Each family got rations based on heads, 1 scoop of rice, half a can of beans, every meal measured by the scrape of a spoon across tin. The twins hated it. Their father argued. Reese, head still bandaged from his fight with a walker outside the fence, called it weak to eat like beggars when we had grills and muscle. But in the end Priya's voice held, quiet but absolute, because she was the one who knew which child needed more, and which man could go without another day. The first shared meal happened that evening. We sat in a circle on the asphalt, lanterns hanging from tree branches, rice boiled with a can of tomatoes divided into chipped bowls. Milo sat on Christina's lap and tried to chase grains with his fingers. The twins pretended it was chilly night like before ball games. For a brief hour we weren't survivors, we were neighbors again. But cracks showed even in the laughter. I caught Harper's eyes flicking to Priya's ledger, as if she already hated the way a notebook held power over her stomach. I saw Reese fold a packet of sugar into his pocket when he thought no one was looking. I saw the twins' father eat half his ration, then slide the rest into a napkin when Priya's back was turned. The wall made us feel safe, but safety made us bold enough to start watching each other instead of the trees. By the second day we had jobs. Delgado organized them like squads. Guard duty, maintenance, food prep, salvage. Everyone carried a title. Everyone carried weight. Jay was scout, climbing trees or creeping along fences with binoculars. Tanner worked salvage, ripping gutters for nails, stripping doors for hinges. Priya stayed at the ledger, rationing water, boiling it twice before letting anyone touch it. Christina split between helping her and keeping Milo quiet when his cries grew too sharp in the night. I floated, patching gaps, training eyes with binoculars, reminding them where the chalk muster line lay. My job was leadership, or at least pretending I carried it like armor. For a while it worked. The cul-de-sac looked alive again. Lawns turned into gardens. Driveways turned into stockpiles. Rooftops became towers. The sound of hammering and children's voices almost drowned the moans outside. Almost. On the third night we held a meeting. Delgado insisted on it, said order needed ritual. We gathered at the chalk line with lanterns, smoke from the grills drifting across us like incense. He spoke like a sergeant, voice sharp, lines clear. Rations stay measured. Watch shifts are not to be skipped. Anyone caught hoarding answers to the group. Everyone nodded. Everyone agreed. But their eyes betrayed them. Priya's ledger had already become scripture. She set it on her lap like a Bible, hands resting on it, daring anyone to challenge her numbers. The twins' father leaned back with arms crossed, his jaw tight, his eyes calculating. Christina stayed silent, rocking Milo in rhythm with her own heartbeat. Tanner picked at the callus on his palm. Reese leaned on his crowbar, grin mocking, but he didn't speak. We voted by show of hands to keep the system. Majority carried. But the air was thicker than the night itself. Later, when most had drifted back to porches or rooftops, I sat near the grills watching embers collapse into ash. Tanner joined me, his axe laid across his knees. He stared into the coals for a long time before speaking. This isn't going to hold, he said. Not the wall, the people. I asked him what he meant. They'll turn on each other before the dead break through, he answered. Hunger makes neighbors dangerous. I wanted to argue, but my silence agreed with him. By the end of the first week the cracks widened. Reese bragged about how many walkers he'd killed on his last watch, but no one had seen the bodies. Christina whispered that Priya had taken a second helping from the pot, though I saw Priya give it to Milo. The twins fought over a slingshot. Their father snapped at Delgado about watch rotations. The dead moaned at the fences. We moaned at each other. One evening, just as lanterns were being lit, a crash echoed from the far end of the barricade. We scrambled to the chalk line, weapons raised, ready for collapse. But it wasn't a horde, only a single body that had stumbled into a stack of fence panels and pulled them half loose before falling silent. Still, the fear didn't fade. It clung like smoke. People argued about who should have been on watch, who was too slow to answer, who froze. No one admitted it, but I saw it in their eyes. We weren't measuring courage anymore. We were measuring weakness. That night, from the tower, I looked down at the cul-de-sac and saw both truths at once. From above it looked strong, a wall of cars and lumber, watch posts on roofs, torches marking boundaries. From below it looked fragile, like a cage where every neighbor measured every other neighbor's breath. We had built our wall to keep the dead out, and in doing so we had built something else, a stage where paranoia could rehearse its lines. It was only a matter of time before the play began. By the second week the cul-de-sac no longer smelled like charcoal and boiled rice. It smelled like sweat and nerves. Hunger has a way of soaking into skin. You can taste it on breath, see it in the way eyes dart to other people's bowls. The ledger told the truth each morning. Cans crossed off, rice measured thinner, beans stretched with more water. Priya's handwriting stayed steady, but her face hollowed with each line she drew. The first fight started in whispers. Reese muttered that the twins' father was eating more than his share. Tanner swore he saw Reese slip a packet of jerky from his own pack into the night. Christina accused Delgado of shaving rations for himself under the excuse of keeping watch longer. Nobody shouted, not yet, but the silence around the fire grew sharp enough to cut. I spent my watches tracing the wall with my eyes, counting the places where cars sagged on their shocks, where plywood bowed. The barricade held fine against the occasional stray walker, their skulls collapsing easy against crowbars and axe heads. But the wall wasn't built for us, it was built for them, and now the real pressure came from inside. On the 5th morning of the second week, Priya announced we were down to 10 days of food at current rations. No one spoke. Milo started crying because he could feel the air tighten. Reese leaned against his crowbar and smiled like the news proved him right about something. We gathered for a meeting in the chalk circle. Delgado tried to sound steady. His voice still carried the weight of rank even if no one saluted anymore. He said we had two choices: cut rations further or risk a run into the city for more supplies. That word, run, hit everyone differently. Christina's face blanched. The twins whispered excitedly until their father hushed them. Tanner spat into the dirt. Reese grinned wider. Arguments rose fast. Christina said leaving was suicide, that the wall was the only thing keeping Milo alive. Reese laughed, said starving behind a wall was slower suicide. Tanner pointed out that fewer rations would make us weak before we even reached the city. Delgado barked for quiet, but his voice cracked halfway. When the shouting finally stopped, the vote split down the middle. Half wanted to stay, half wanted to run. No decision meant no action. We dispersed like soldiers after a failed charge, shoulders hunched, eyes on the ground. The wall felt smaller after that. Every creak of plywood sounded like betrayal. Every sigh of hunger sounded like accusation. Priya still wrote in the ledger, but now she kept it pressed tight against her chest as though it were a shield. That evening I caught Reese leaning close to the twins' father near the grill. Their voices were low but sharp. When I walked closer they stopped talking, eyes narrowing like boys caught stealing from a store. Later Tanner whispered to me that he had seen Christina slip a can from the ledger pile into her own bag. He swore he wasn't lying. I told him to keep quiet, that rumors rot faster than food. But I lay awake all night hearing Milo whimper, and couldn't shake the thought that Tanner might be right. On the 7th night, we shared the last jar of peanut butter. Priya split it into 6 bowls, a spoonful each, no more. The smell alone made Milo cry harder. Christina pressed her fingers into his mouth to quiet him. Reese licked his bowl clean with a grin that made everyone else avert their eyes. When the bowls were empty, no one moved. We sat in silence, lantern light making faces look like masks. The moaning from outside rose with the wind, and for a moment I couldn't tell which sound belonged to the dead and which belonged to the living. The next morning Delgado woke us with a shout. One of the water jugs was lighter than it had been. He weighed it with calloused hands, swore it was short by at least a quart. Priya flipped through her ledger, showed the numbers that proved him right. No one admitted it. No one looked guilty. But from that moment the cul-de-sac was divided. Families locked their doors again. Neighbors whispered through cracks instead of across porches. Kids played less. The wall held, but the air inside turned poisonous. On the 10th day, hunger began to show in our movements. Priya's hands trembled when she wrote. Tanner's axe swings grew slower. Jay's voice cracked when he called from the trees. Even Delgado slumped during his watch. Only Reese looked strong, his grin sharper than ever. That evening another meeting erupted into chaos. Christina argued that Milo needed more food than adults, that children couldn't survive on scraps. Reese laughed loud, said if Milo couldn't keep up then he was dragging us down. Tanner lunged at him, axe raised, and I barely caught his wrist before steel met skull. The twins' father shouted that everyone was lying about what they had. Priya clutched her ledger and screamed that her numbers never lied. Delgado tried to order silence, but his voice was drowned. For a moment it felt like the wall would burst from inside before the dead even touched it. I took the midnight watch after that meeting. The street lay quiet except for the moans beyond the fence. I looked at the barricade, at the cars and lumber and scraps that had once felt like salvation. In the dark it looked like a cage, bars bent inward, shadows pressing closer with every breath. I thought about the hunger that crawled through us faster than infection. The dead at the fence were patient, slow, predictable. The hunger inside was clever, sly, hiding cans under porches, slipping sugar into pockets, trading whispers sharper than knives. We had built our wall to keep the dead out. But it was hunger that was going to kill us first. And hunger, unlike the dead, wore the faces of neighbors. The sound came at night, sharp and violent, a thunderclap against steel and wood. I bolted upright in my sleeping bag, heart hammering, rifle in my hands before my eyes even opened all the way. Another crash followed, louder, closer. Then came the groan, that hollow sound that carried through skin and bone like a memory of pain. Delgado shouted from the chalk line, "Breach! Everyone up, to the wall." Feet pounded porches, doors slammed, kids cried. Priya pulled Milo tight against her chest as Christina dragged them both into the muster point. Tanner grabbed his axe, face pale but steady. Reese laughed as he sprinted past me. Crowbar raised high like this was the fight he had been waiting for. We formed a jagged half-circle at the barricade, lanterns throwing long shadows across the cars and plywood. The sound came again, a crash, a rattle, a moan. For a moment it felt like the entire wall was sagging inward, about to split and spill us into teeth. Then silence. The lantern light shook in my hands. Everyone held their breath. Even the dead outside seemed to pause. And then we saw it. A single body, slack and ruined, had stumbled against the barricade. Its skull was half caved already, jaw crooked, one arm bent backwards like broken furniture. It groaned again, a thin reed of sound, and slammed its shoulder into the plywood. Another groan answered from farther down the street. Only two of them. Two bodies. Not a horde. Not the end. But the panic had already done its work. Delgado barked orders. Reese and Tanner hauled the bodies off the barricade with crowbar and axe, heads pulped quick and quiet. The rest of us stood useless, weapons raised against a threat that wasn't there. When it was over, the cul-de-sac smelled like iron and sweat. No breach, Delgado announced, just strays. But nobody relaxed. Christina whispered that the moans sounded louder tonight. Priya whispered back that it only felt louder because our stomachs were empty. Reese spat into the dirt and grinned like the whole thing proved his point, that the wall would never hold when real numbers came. I wanted to believe Delgado, that it had been nothing, but my ears still rang with the sound of wood rattling, the way it carried across the houses like a drum. The next morning the cul-de-sac was quieter than usual. No kids running, no hammering nails. Everyone moved slow, shadows under their eyes. Fear had stolen more strength than hunger. We patched the section where the walkers had hit, even though nothing was broken. Tanner drove rebar into the soil. Reese layered chain link over the plywood. Delgado double-checked the straps. The barricade looked stronger when we finished, but we looked weaker. At breakfast, Priya rationed another half scoop of rice. Christina tried to feed Milo first, but he pushed the spoon away, eyes fixed on the wall. The twins ate in silence, their father glaring at Reese the whole time. Tanner chewed each bite like it might be his last. Nobody mentioned how fast we had panicked the night before. Nobody admitted that it hadn't been the walkers we were afraid of. It was the thought of each other breaking. That afternoon I climbed Tower 2 with the binoculars. The street beyond the barricade looked the same as always. Cracked pavement, weeds in the gutters, houses staring with blind windows. But when the wind shifted, I caught the sound of groans again. Not close, not far, just a reminder. Jay joined me in the tower. He was younger than the rest of us, maybe 17, still thin in a way that made hunger hit harder. He sat cross-legged, helmet crooked, and watched the road. "We almost lost it last night," he said softly. I asked what he meant. "People," he answered. "Not the wall. Us." Everyone froze, or shouted, or looked to someone else. If more than 2 had come, if it had been 20. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. That night Delgado called another meeting in the chalk circle. He said the false alarm was a lesson, that we needed discipline. Guard shifts would now include drills, signals for breach, signals for clear. Priya suggested we use whistles. Reese laughed, said whistles would bring the whole damn county down on us. Tanner said maybe that was better than sitting in silence waiting to rot. The vote split again, just like before. Half wanted structure, half wanted change. Nobody wanted to admit fear was eating us faster than hunger. The meeting ended with no resolution. Reese muttered that next time it wouldn't be strays. Christina carried Milo back to her porch without a word. Tanner sharpened his axe until sparks jumped. Priya marked rations in her ledger, hands trembling more than usual. I stayed at the chalk line long after the lanterns went out, staring at the wall, hearing the echo of the crash again and again. At midnight another sound came. Not a crash, just a soft scrape along the barricade. I raised my rifle, heart pounding, and listened. Another scrape. Then silence. I waited 10 minutes before moving. When I finally checked, nothing was there. Just scratches in the plywood, fresh and deep. In the morning I showed Delgado. He said strays must have tested it again. Tanner nodded. Reese grinned like the scratches were proof of prophecy. Priya looked sick. Nobody else needed convincing. The breach hadn't happened. The wall still stood. But in our heads, in our nerves, the breach had already torn through. We built our wall to keep the dead out. But all it took was 2 strays and a scrape in the night for us to realize the wall couldn't keep fear from crawling in. And once fear got inside, there was no patch strong enough to hold it back. The cul-de-sac felt smaller every day. The wall didn't shrink, the houses didn't move, but the space between us narrowed like a noose. Every step carried the weight of eyes watching, neighbors turning into auditors, counters of spoons and gulps. Priya still kept the ledger, her handwriting now so sharp it looked carved instead of written. She read it aloud each morning, cans, scoops, days left. Each line was a death toll disguised as arithmetic. Milo whimpered when she spoke, like even a child could hear the hunger hidden in her numbers. Tanner said nothing now unless pressed, his axe always in reach, his back to a wall. Delgado still tried to sound like a commander, but his voice broke when he barked orders, and no one snapped to attention. The twins' father glared at everyone, especially Reese, whose grin stretched wider the thinner our bellies grew. We had been neighbors once, now we were factions. It started with whispers. Reese told the twins' father that Priya was holding back cans for herself. Priya told Christina she saw Reese sneaking sugar packets from his pocket. Tanner pulled me aside and swore the twins' father had a stash under his porch. Christina whispered that Delgado was hoarding water for long watches. None of it proven. All of it believed. I walked the circle with my rifle and felt the lines splitting under my boots, invisible boundaries where one family's trust ended and another's paranoia began. The wall outside looked solid, but inside, fences of suspicion grew taller by the hour. On the 7th morning Reese refused his ration. He stood in the chalk circle, crowbar across his shoulders, and laughed when Priya tried to hand him the spoon. "This is a beggar's meal," he said, scraping his boot on the asphalt. "We starve ourselves for scraps while the world outside rots with food waiting to be taken." Christina snapped back, calling him reckless, suicidal. Reese smirked, asked if Milo's stomach was worth dying behind a fence. Tanner's hand tightened on his axe. The twins' father muttered something about cowards. Delgado shouted for order, but his voice broke again. The meeting ended without a vote, without resolution. Reese left his ration untouched, and every eye watched to see if he ate later. By afternoon, 2 families stopped sharing chores. Christina stayed inside with Milo, curtains drawn. The twins' father hammered nails on his own porch, building shutters over windows that faced inward instead of outward. Tanner walked the wall alone. Priya worked the ledger like it was her only prayer. I climbed Tower 2 and looked down at the circle. From above it resembled a wagon fort, cars and lumber forming a ring, smoke rising from grills that barely burned. But inside, neighbors sat apart, doors shut, faces hard. The wall wasn't a shield anymore. It was a line. That night I heard voices through thin walls. Reese and the twins' father, whispering, arguing, then falling silent when footsteps passed. Later Tanner came to me with dark eyes. "They're plotting something," he said. "What proof do you have?" I asked. "The kind you feel in your bones," he answered. "The kind that doesn't wait for paper." I wanted to tell him bones weren't evidence, but the truth was I felt it too. On the 9th day, the first theft was undeniable. A can of tuna missing from Priya's pile. Her hands shook when she opened the ledger. Her voice cracked when she called it out. No one admitted it. No one confessed. Christina accused Reese outright. Reese grinned, asked if she wanted to search his bag. Tanner stepped forward, axe across his shoulder. Delgado shouted for calm. Milo cried. The twins' father stayed silent, his eyes sharp and bright. The can was never found. That evening Reese took guard with Tanner. From Tower 1 I watched them circle, never more than 10 feet apart, but never speaking. Their shadows stretched across the yard like crossed blades. At midnight Tanner came to my door. His face was pale, his voice flat. "He's going to break us," Tanner said, "sooner than the dead ever could." He didn't have to say who. The next morning we gathered again. Priya's ledger said we had 4 days left at current rations. Reese laughed. Christina cursed him. Delgado tried to shout over the noise. Milo wailed. The twins played with rocks, oblivious or pretending to be. We didn't vote. We didn't decide. We only shouted. And in the end we walked away hungrier than before. That night, lying awake under the stars, I realized the truth. The wall hadn't failed. The dead hadn't breached. Hunger hadn't killed us yet. What split us was the line we built between each other. Every whispered accusation, every stolen kin, every stare across the circle was another plank in the fence dividing us. We had built our wall to keep the dead out, but what we really built was a prison for trust. And in that prison, every neighbor was turning into an enemy. Nights inside the cul-de-sac turned longer than the days. The moans outside the wall were steady but distant, manageable, something you could mark on a map. The real noise came from inside, the rustle of footsteps that weren't on shift, the scrape of a lid sliding off a pot, the whisper of voices cut off when I drew near. The ledger said 4 days of food left, but I already knew numbers lied when fear took over. Hunger makes arithmetic soft, bends it until 1 scoop becomes 2, until a family convinces itself that survival means stealing in silence. It was Tanner who told me first. He said he saw Christina slip into the ledger pile when Priya was asleep, said she tucked something small into her coat before carrying Milo back to the porch. He swore it on his axe. Later that same day Priya pulled me aside, eyes hollow, and told me Reese was sneaking past the barricade during watch. Said she heard the gate shift, said she found a wrapper under his cot that wasn't part of the ledger. She whispered that he had a stash hidden somewhere. The twins' father came next. He leaned close during a shift and muttered that Tanner was keeping food under his porch, that the axeman talked about fairness but never looked thin enough. His eyes were sharp with something beyond suspicion, almost joy at accusing someone else. 3 accusations. 3 different names. No proof. The wall wasn't cracking from the outside. It was rotting in the dark corners of our houses. That night I made my rounds slower than usual. I stopped behind Christina's place first. Curtains drawn tight, no light inside, but I heard soft rustling and Milo's muffled whimpers. It could have been nothing. It could have been everything. Next I checked Reese. He was on the wall near the throat, leaning against his crowbar, grinning when he saw me. He said nothing. I said nothing. But when I walked past the barricade I saw the chain link sag just enough to let a body slip through. Later I crouched near Tanner's porch. The dirt beneath the step looked disturbed, darker, pressed down. I thought about digging but stopped. If I found nothing, I would still have to explain the suspicion. If I found something, I might have to swing my rifle, but into a man who had stood beside me through fire. So I left it untouched. Secrets in the dark. In the morning, Priya's voice cracked when she opened the ledger. A can of beans gone. She held the notebook high, her hand trembling, her voice shaking as she called it theft. Nobody admitted it. Nobody moved. Christina said Priya must have miscounted. Reese laughed. Tanner muttered that liars sleep closest to the ledger. The twins' father said nothing but stared at me with eyes that asked which side I was on. The meeting ended with silence instead of answers. And silence was worse than shouting. That evening I caught Reese crouched near the barricade, his crowbar wedged between plywood and bumper, prying gently like a man testing a tooth. I stepped close, rifle raised, and asked what he was doing. He smiled wide, said he was checking for weakness. I told him he already found it. He laughed, slapped my shoulder, walked away whistling. Later Christina approached me, Milo in her arms. She whispered that she had seen Reese sneaking toward the throat during watch. She begged me to keep him away from the gate. Her eyes were wild, hollow from hunger and fear. That night I stayed on shift longer than assigned. I waited by the barricade, listening for footsteps. Twice I thought I heard them. Twice I raised my rifle. Twice nothing came. But the scratches on the plywood were deeper in the morning. The ledger said 3 days of food left. Priya read it aloud. Delgado barked that anyone caught stealing would be cast out. Tanner gripped his axe tighter. Reese grinned wider. Christina whispered to Milo that it would be all right. The twins' father spat into the dirt. And me, I watched them all and realized trust was already gone. That night the thefts stopped being whispers. I woke to a crash, the sound of tin scattering on pavement. By the time I reached the chalk line, Priya was screaming, clutching the ledger, pointing at Reese. He stood with his crowbar raised, grinning, 2 cans at his feet. He said he was only checking, said the pile was unguarded, said Priya was a liar. Tanner lunged, but I caught his arm. Delgado shouted for order, but his voice cracked again. Christina wept into Milo's hair. The twins' father laughed bitterly. We argued until dawn. No decision made. No punishment chosen. Just more lines drawn between us. The next morning Priya refused to read the ledger. She sat with Milo instead, rocking him while Christina stared hollow-eyed at the wall. Tanner sharpened his axe in silence. Reese paced the chalk line, grinning at everyone. Delgado sat with his head in his hands. The cul-de-sac was no longer a community. It was a prison of locked doors and whispered secrets. That night I lay awake listening to footsteps. I knew someone was moving between houses, slipping cans under coats, shifting dirt beneath porches. But I didn't rise. I didn't stop them, because by then I understood the truth. The wall hadn't failed. The dead hadn't breached. The food hadn't run out yet. What killed us was what we hid from each other. Every secret stash. Every whispered theft. Every lie told in the dark. We built our wall to keep the dead out. But secrets walked freely inside. And secrets, unlike hunger, never die. By the 12th day the cul-de-sac had no voice left. Conversations shrank to grunts, orders to whispers, laughter to nothing at all. The ledger said 2 days of food remained, but in truth there was less. Everyone knew it. Everyone lied about it. Christina's cheeks had sunk to hollows. Milo's ribs showed through his shirt when he stretched. Priya's hands shook so badly she spilled half a scoop of rice before she even tried to cook it. Tanner walked the wall with his axe always in his hand, sharpening it more than swinging it. Reese smiled wider with every ration cut, like hunger made him stronger while the rest of us withered. The twins' father avoided everyone now, working quietly at his porch, nails tapping in rhythm through the night. We were ghosts already, breathing and starving inside a circle of cars. That evening Delgado tried again to rally us. He stood at the chalk line, voice raw, and said we needed another vote. Either ration further or leave. Christina shouted that leaving was madness, that Milo would not survive a run. Tanner shouted back that staying was slow suicide. Priya clutched the ledger to her chest, begging for calm. Reese laughed at them all, crowbar resting on his shoulder like a king's scepter. We didn't vote. We didn't decide. The circle dissolved into silence. But later, after the lanterns burned low, I heard voices near the barricade. Not moans. Not strays. Human voices, hushed and broken. I followed the sound to the throat. Reese stood there with the twins' father, their heads bent together, whispering fast. I heard only fragments. We can't starve here, Reese hissed. They'll follow us out, the twins' father muttered. Better out there than rotting in here, Reese growled. I stayed in the shadows, heart pounding, not sure if I should step in or wait. They broke apart before I decided. Reese walked back toward his porch whistling. The twins' father stayed behind, staring at the barricade like it was already open. The next day the ledger was lighter again. A can of rice gone. Priya wept as she showed the empty space. Nobody admitted it. Nobody moved. Delgado snapped. He shouted that the next thief would be cast over the wall. No trial, no appeal. His voice cracked, but his eyes burned. For the first time in days, everyone looked at him, and everyone believed him. That night I heard hammering again at the twins' porch. But it wasn't shutters this time. It was something heavier. Something deliberate. At dawn the wall shook. Not from us. From outside. A herd had wandered in, maybe 20 strong, drawn by some sound or smell. They pressed against the barricade, moans rising like thunder. The wall held, but the groans poured through every crack. Milo screamed. The twins cried. Priya prayed. Tanner and I rushed to reinforce the section, axes swinging, rifles cracking. Reese appeared beside us, but instead of striking the walkers, he struck at the straps holding a panel. I caught his wrist, snarled at him, and for a heartbeat his grin faltered. Then I saw it in his eyes. Not madness. Not hunger. Choice. He wanted the wall open. We forced him back, tied the panel down again, and drove the herd off with fire from the grills. The smell of burning flesh clung to us all day. Afterward Delgado demanded an explanation. Reese shrugged, said he slipped. Tanner lunged, had to be dragged off. Christina screamed that Milo almost died because of him. Priya begged for calm, but her voice broke in sobs. The twins' father stayed silent, his eyes on the ground. We let Reese walk away, but we all knew what he had tried. That night the desperate bargain revealed itself. I woke to scraping, softer than before, deliberate. I crept to the throat, rifle raised, and found the twins' father prying at the panel. Reese crouched beside him, whispering sharp. They're starving us in here, Reese hissed. Better to let a few in, grab what we can, and slip out in the chaos. The twins' father's hands shook as he worked the crowbar. His eyes were wet. He muttered about his kids, about not watching them starve, about any chance being better than none. I stepped forward, rifle steady, voice low. You open that wall, and it's not just you who dies. It's all of us. Reese grinned, teeth catching lantern light. Maybe all of us deserve it. The twins' father froze, crowbar in his hands, torn between the weight of his children's hunger and the death pressing against the other side. Christina's voice rang out behind me, fierce and broken. She begged him not to do it, begged him to think of Milo. Priya stumbled up, clutching the ledger like it could stop bullets. Tanner's axe gleamed in the lantern glow. Delgado shouted for order, his voice cracking. The cul-de-sac exploded in screams. Reese pulled hard at the crowbar, and the panel groaned. Tanner charged. The twins' father staggered back, torn between us and his own blood. Reese swung the crowbar. Tanner blocked with the axe, sparks flying. Priya screamed. Milo cried. The moans outside grew louder, as if summoned by our chaos. The desperate bargain was here, made in silence, sealed in hunger. We dragged Reese down, bound his hands, his grin never fading. The twins' father collapsed beside him, sobbing into his fists. Tanner raised the axe to end it, but Delgado barked him down. Christina carried Milo away. Priya clutched the ledger like a shield. We stood in silence, only the moans beyond the wall filling the air. We built our wall to keep the dead out. But tonight I realized the truth. The wall was never the prison. Hunger was. And hunger makes bargains no one survives. The morning after the bargain, the cul-de-sac sat in silence. Reese was tied to a post in the chalk circle, wrists bound, grin wide as ever. The twins' father sat apart with his children, head bowed, shame heavier than hunger. Priya refused to open the ledger. Tanner paced with his axe. Delgado muttered orders no one followed. Christina rocked Milo, who cried without tears. The wall moaned louder than ever. Not from the wind, not from strays, from numbers. A herd had found us in the night. Dozens, maybe more, pressing, clawing, rattling the cars until straps creaked. Their voices rolled like thunder through the cul-de-sac. We built this wall to hold. But it wasn't built for forever. By noon the barricade sagged. Plywood bowed inward, Straps snapped like whips. We scrambled to reinforce with everything we had left: mattresses, patio furniture, even the tricycle Harper once rode. Every slam of bone on steel echoed in our skulls. Sweat mixed with ash on our faces. Reese laughed through it all. He shouted that the wall was already dead, that we were only delaying. His voice carried over the moans, taunting, singing. The twins' father begged us to gag him. Tanner raised his axe. Delgado barked him down again. We worked until our arms shook. But no matter what we stacked, no matter how we tied, the wall bent further. The dead didn't need cleverness. They only needed time. By dusk one section gave. A panel splintered near the throat. A pale hand pushed through, fingers snapping as they scraped the air. Priya screamed. Christina pulled Milo back. Tanner's axe fell. The hand severed, but another followed, then another. We braced with bodies, holding steel with our weight, shoving back against the tide. Sweat poured, lungs burned, every moan louder than the last. For hours we fought the wall itself. And then the night came. The breach started small, a single strap snapping. Then another. The panel caved inward. Walkers spilled through like water from a burst pipe. Tanner swung his axe, skulls cracked, blood sprayed. Delgado fired his pistol until it clicked empty. Priya swung a hammer with trembling hands. Reese roared with laughter, even as the dead closed in. Chaos swallowed the cul-de-sac. Screams, moans, gunfire, the crack of wood splitting. The twins' father tried to drag his children toward the throat, but the wall there was already gone. A flood of bodies pouring over cars. Christina held Milo tight, running for Tower 2. Priya dropped her ledger, pages scattering across the asphalt like dead leaves. I fought with my rifle, but until it broke. Then I fought with my fists. Then I fought just to breathe. We tried to form a line, but neighbors broke faster than barricades. The twins vanished in the crush. Priya fell screaming under a pile. Tanner roared as teeth closed on his arm, his axe swinging until both he and the dead went down together. Delgado shouted orders no one heard, his voice lost under the chorus of death. Reese broke free of his bonds in the chaos, crowbar in hand, grinning as he swung at anything that moved. He wasn't fighting to survive. He was fighting to watch it all burn. The wall fell in every direction. Cars overturned. Plywood splintered. Flames rose as grills tipped into barricades. The cul-de-sac that once smelled of charcoal and cut grass now burned like a funeral pyre. I grabbed Christina's arm, dragged her toward Tower 2. We climbed to the roof with Milo clutched between us. From there I saw the circle below, a whirlpool of bodies, neighbors screaming, walkers feeding, fire spreading. The wall that once looked like salvation now looked like a tomb. Delgado made his last stand at the chalk line, pistol empty, knife flashing, voice hoarse. The twins' father disappeared in the crush with his children. Priya's ledger burned beside her body. Tanner's axe gleamed one last time before the dead buried it under bone. Reese stood in the center laughing, arms wide, crowbar dripping, until they swallowed him too. From the roof I saw the cul-de-sac collapse in on itself, our fortress becoming nothing more than fuel. When the fire reached Tower 2 we climbed down the backside, slipping into shadows, slipping into night. The herd was too busy feeding to follow. The fire lit the sky behind us, orange and red against the dark. We walked away with nothing but each other, Christina clutching Milo, me holding a rifle without bullets. We didn't look back. At dawn we found ourselves on an empty road. The smoke from the cul-de-sac still rose behind us, a black pillar marking the death of a neighborhood. Milo slept against Christina's shoulder, thin but alive. Her eyes were hollow but burning. I thought of the ledger, the chalk line, the wall, all gone. We built our wall to keep the dead out. But it wasn't the dead that destroyed it. It was us. Fear, hunger, secrets, bargains. The wall fell long before the barricade broke. Now the road stretched ahead, empty and silent. No fences, no chalk, no neighbors, only the endless horizon and the sound of our own breaths. I told Christina the truth. We weren't survivors of the cul-de-sac. We were its ghosts, carrying the memory of walls that kept nothing out and everything in. And as we walked I knew one thing for certain. No wall in this world could save us. Because the dead were outside, but the end was always inside.